I never thought friendship could be deadly until I met Sarah Chun at the university orientation 3 years ago. She had this magnetic smile and confident laugh that drew people in like moths to a flame, and I was no exception. Looking back now, as I sit in this safe house with police protection, I realized that smile was the first warning sign I ignored. Sarah wasn't just charismatic, she was calculating, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. Started innocently enough. Sarah and I became roommates in the dorms, and within weeks, she had assembled what she called the Circle, a tight-knit group of 6 friends who did everything together. There was Marcus, a quiet psychology major with piercing blue eyes who seemed to analyze every conversation. Jenny, a Bubble theater student who could cry on command. David, a computer science genius with social anxiety who worshipped Sarah like she was his savior. Lisa, a pre-med student with an obsession for true crime podcasts. And me, Emma, the naive literature major who thought she'd found her forever friends. The Circle met every Friday night in Sarah's dorm room for what she called true sessions, supposedly. A way for us to bond by sharing our deepest secrets and fears. I thought it was just harmless college bonding until I realized Sarah was mentally cataloging every vulnerability we revealed. She had this leather-bound journal where she'd write notes after each session, claiming she was documenting our friendship journey. The way her eyes would light up when someone shared trauma or family secrets should have terrified me. But I was too desperate to belong to see the predator hiding behind the concerned friend facade. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came during our sophomore year when my roommate before Sarah, a girl named Amanda Rodriguez, suddenly transferred schools mid-semester. Amanda had been part of our initial friend group, but she'd started asking too many questions about Sarah's past and why Sarah never talked about her family. I remember the last conversation I had with Amanda. She grabbed my arm outside the library, her hands shaking, and whispered that I needed to be careful around Sarah. She said she'd found something disturbing in Sarah's things, but before she could explain, Sarah appeared behind us like she'd materialized from thin air. The look that passed between Sarah and Amanda was pure ice, and within a week, Amanda was gone. Sarah told everyone that Amanda had a family emergency, but when I tried to contact Amanda later, her phone was disconnected and her social media accounts had vanished entirely. Sarah's control over our group became more apparent as time went on. She had this uncanny ability to know things about us that we'd never told her: personal family details, childhood memories, even our class schedules when we hadn't shared them. She'd casually drop these facts into conversation, watching our faces for reactions with those calculating eyes. When I questioned how she knew my grandmother had died of cancer when I'd never mentioned it, she just smiled and said she was good at reading people. The way she said it made my skin crawl, but I pushed down the unease because I didn't want to lose my friends. The dynamic in our group was toxic in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. Sarah had positioned herself as the leader, the one we all sought approval from, and she used that power to manipulate us against each other. She'd share private information one person had confided in her with others in the group, then watch the resulting drama unfold like it was her personal entertainment. If anyone tried to call her out, she'd turn on the tears and play the victim, making the rest of us feel guilty for attacking her. She was a master manipulator who could make you question your own reality. The real horror began during our junior year when we moved into a rented house off campus, all 6 of us crammed into a 4-bedroom place that Sarah had insisted we get together. She claimed it would strengthen our bond, but I think she wanted us isolated and under her complete control. The house itself was unsettling, an old Victorian with creaky floorboards and thin walls where every whispered conversation could be heard from the next room. Sarah took the master bedroom naturally, while the rest of us doubled up in smaller rooms. I shared with Lisa, who had developed an unhealthy obsession with crime scene photos and forensic shows that she'd watch late into the night with the volume barely audible. Living with Sarah, day and night revealed disturbing patterns I'd managed to ignore when we only hung out occasionally. She barely slept, often wandering the halls at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'd hear her talking to someone on the phone in hushed, urgent whispers. When I asked her about it the next morning, she'd claim she'd been asleep all night and suggest I was hearing things. She had this way of making you doubt your own perceptions that was deeply unsettling. I started keeping track of these incidents in my own journal, hidden beneath my mattress, because I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The first real tragedy struck in November when Marcus was found dead in his room. The official cause was listed as suicide and overdose of prescription antidepressants, but something about it felt wrong to those of us who knew him best. Marcus had been seeing a therapist and was actually doing better mentally than he'd been in months. More disturbing was that the only person who'd seen him the night he died was Sarah. She claimed they'd had a deep conversation about his struggles, and she'd convinced him to seek more help, which was why his death was such a shock to her. But I'd heard them arguing through the thin walls around midnight, Sarah's voice sharp and threatening, though I couldn't make out the words. When I mentioned this to the police, Sarah broke down crying and said I was traumatized and imagining things that weren't there. After Marcus's death, the group dynamic shifted dramatically. Sarah became more controlling, more possessive of our time and attention. She instituted new house rules about not leaving without telling her where we were going, not talking to outsiders about our private family matters, and mandatory group meetings every evening to support each other through our grief. These meetings felt more like interrogations, with Sarah probing us about our daily activities, our interactions with professors and classmates, our families. She claimed she was worried about us, that losing Marcus had made her protective, but it felt suffocating, and wrong. Jenny was the next to show signs of cracking under the pressure. She'd always been dramatic, but she became genuinely paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder and jumping at every sound. She started talking about feeling watched, about finding her belongings moved when she wasn't in her room, about hearing footsteps in the attic at night. Sarah dismissed these concerns as grief-induced anxiety and suggested Jenny might need professional help. But I was beginning to experience similar things. Items would disappear from my room, only to show up days later in strange places. My laptop would be moved slightly from where I'd left it. Personal photographs would be rearranged in subtle ways that made me question my own memory. The breaking point came in February when Jenny didn't come home after her evening theater class. Sarah seemed unusually calm about this, suggesting Jenny might have gone to stay with a friend without telling us. But Jenny never went anywhere without meticulously planning it first. When she was still missing after 24 hours, David and I wanted to call the police, but Sarah convinced us to wait, saying we'd look foolish if Jenny just showed up. 3 days later, Jenny's body was found in the basement of an abandoned building near campus. She'd been strangled, and there were signs of a struggle, but no evidence of sexual assault or robbery. The police treated it as a random crime, but I knew it wasn't random at all. That night, I heard Sarah on the phone again in the early morning hours, her voice cold and businesslike. 2 down, 3 to go. I heard her say clearly through the thin wall between our rooms, "The plan is working perfectly." My blood turned to ice as the reality hit me. Sarah wasn't just our manipulative friend. She was systematically eliminating us, and I had no idea why. I pretended to be asleep when she crept past my door, but I could feel her pausing outside, listening for signs that I was awake. The knowledge that a killer was living in my house, someone I'd trusted and confided in for years, was paralyzing. The next morning, I tried to act normal while secretly planning my escape. I couldn't go to the police with my suspicions. I had no real proof, just overheard phone conversations and a growing certainty that my friend was a murderer. Sarah was too smart, too careful, and she'd positioned herself perfectly as the grieving friend who was just trying to hold our group together through tragedy. I knew she'd make me look unstable if I accused her without evidence. Instead, I started researching Sarah's background, something I realized I'd never done despite being close friends for years. What I found chilled me to the bone. Sarah Chun wasn't her real name, it was Sarah Morrison, and she'd transferred to our university from a school in Oregon where 3 students had died under suspicious circumstances. Before that, she'd been at a community college in California where 2 students in her study group had committed suicide within months of each other. There was a pattern spanning at least 5 years and 3 schools, always involving close friend groups where Sarah positioned herself as the caring, concerned friend before people started dying. She wasn't just a killer, she was a serial killer who used friendship as her weapon. I tried to warn David and Lisa, but Sarah had anticipated this. She'd been watching me more closely, monitoring my computer usage, going through my things while I was at class. When I approached David with my discoveries, he immediately ran to Sarah and told her everything. She called a house meeting that evening, expressing hurt and concern that I was having paranoid delusions and creating conspiracy theories about our dead friends. She suggested I was having a mental health crisis brought on by grief and guilt, and she'd spoken to a counselor about getting me help. The way she delivered this performance with tears in her eyes and genuine sounding concern in her voice was masterful. David and Lisa looked at me like I was dangerous, like I was the threat in the house. That night, I heard footsteps outside my door for hours. Sarah was pacing the hallway, occasionally stopping to listen at my door. I barricaded it with my dresser and was clutching a kitchen knife I'd managed to smuggle upstairs, but I knew I couldn't stay awake forever. Around 4 a.m, I heard her trying the handle very slowly, testing to see if the door was locked. When she found it blocked, she moved away, but I could hear her whispering to someone on the phone. "Tonight, make it look like suicide. She's becoming a problem." I knew I had to run, but Sarah had systematically isolated me from everyone outside our group over the years. She'd subtly discouraged relationships with classmates, family members, anyone who might have helped me. I'd allowed her to become my entire social world, and now I was trapped with a killer who was planning my death. I waited until dawn, when I heard her shower running, and I slipped out through my bedroom window. I'd practiced this escape route mentally dozens of times, dropping onto the porch roof and climbing down the old oak tree in our backyard. I went straight to the police, but Sarah had been one step ahead of me there too. When I tried to report my suspicions, the officer on duty mentioned that my roommate had already called in a wellness check on me, expressing concern that I was having a mental breakdown and might hurt myself or others. Sarah had painted me as the unstable one, and without concrete evidence, I looked like a paranoid girl who was accusing her caring friend of being a serial killer. They took my report, but I could see they didn't believe me. The officer suggested I speak with a mental health counselor and gave me a card for crisis intervention services. Desperate and running out of options, I decided to gather proof. I knew Sarah kept that leather journal where she documented our friendship journey, and I suspected it contained evidence of her real intentions. I waited until the next evening when I knew she'd be at her psychology class, and I snuck back into the house. David and Lisa were in the living room studying, and they looked at me with a mixture of fear and pity when I walked in. I told them I just needed to get some of my things, and they watched me nervously as I headed upstairs. Sarah's room was immaculate, as always, but I knew her hiding places from years of friendship. The journal was tucked behind her dresser, wrapped in a silk scarf. What I found when I opened it made me physically sick. Page after page of detailed observations about each of us. Our fears, our weaknesses, our family situations, our mental health struggles. But it wasn't the caring documentation of a friend. It was the methodical notes of a predator studying her prey. She'd mapped out our psychological profiles, identified the best ways to manipulate us, and planned out how each of our deaths would look most believable. Marcus's pages were filled with notes about his depression medication, his family, history of mental illness, and detailed plans for making his overdose look like suicide. Jenny's section documented her anxiety, her tendency toward dramatic behavior, and plans for staging her death to look like she'd been attacked by a stranger. My own section was the most extensive, pages and pages of analysis about my personality, my relationships, my fears. The final entry, dated just 2 days ago, simply said, "Emma, too suspicious, too smart. Eliminate immediately. Stage of suicide, history of anxiety, recent paranoid delusions about friends. Use pills from Marcus's room." But the most horrifying discovery was the very first page of the journal, which contained a list of names and locations spanning 7 years. 12 names in total, all crossed out except for 3: David, Lisa, and me. Each name was followed by a location, a method, and the word completed. Sarah wasn't just targeting our little group. We were part of a much larger pattern of systematic murder that had been going on for years. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the device steady. I could hear David and Lisa talking downstairs, their voices carrying up through the thin floors, and I knew I had to get out before Sarah returned. But as I was putting the journal back, I heard the front door open and Sarah's voice calling out cheerfully, "I'm home early. Emma, are you here? I saw your car outside." She had changed her schedule, probably sensing that I might try something like this. I was trapped upstairs with evidence that proved Sarah was a serial killer, but no way to get past her to escape. I could hear her talking to David and Lisa downstairs, her voice sweet and concerned. "Is Emma okay? She seemed so upset earlier. I'm worried she might hurt herself." I realized she was setting up her narrative, preparing David and Lisa to witness my suicide so they could tell the police how disturbed and unstable I'd been. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, like she was savoring the moment. "Emma, are you up there, sweetie? I know you're scared, but we need to talk. I want to help you through this difficult time." Her voice was getting closer, and I could hear something in her hand, a soft plinking sound like pills in a bottle. She was coming to kill me, and she was going to make David and Lisa watch her do it, while believing she was trying to save me from my self-doubt and desperation. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out onto the porch roof. I could hear Sarah in my room now, probably realizing I'd been in her room and discovered her journal. Her voice changed completely, dropping the sweet, concerned tone for something cold and furious. "Emma, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know how this has to end." I could hear David and Lisa downstairs. Confused and frightened by the sudden change in Sarah's voice, I managed to call 911 from the roof, whispering frantically into my phone that there was a serial killer in my house who was trying to murder me. The dispatcher kept asking me to calm down and speak clearly, not understanding the urgency of my situation. I could hear Sarah moving through the house, her footsteps quick and purposeful now that she'd dropped her caring friend act. She was talking to David and Lisa in a voice I'd never heard before, commanding, threatening, completely different from the Sarah we thought we knew. "You're going to help me find Emma," I heard her say, "and you're going to do exactly what I tell you, or you'll end up like Marcus and Jenny. Do you understand me?" David's voice was shaking when he responded, and I realized he and Lisa were finally seeing Sarah for what she really was. But it might be too late for all of us. The police arrived just as Sarah had convinced David and Lisa to help her search the neighborhood for me. I watched from the roof as Sarah smoothly transitioned back into concerned friend mode, telling the officers that she'd called for a wellness check on her roommate who was having a mental health crisis and had threatened suicide. She was so convincing, so genuinely worried seeming, that I saw the officer's body language relax. They believed her. It was only when I climbed down and showed them the photographs of Sarah's journal that the situation shifted. Even then, Sarah maintained her composure beautifully, suggesting that I doctored the photos or planted the journal in her room as part of my paranoid episode. She was so skilled at manipulation that I could see doubt creeping into the officers' faces. But when they searched her room and found the journal exactly where I said it would be, along with Marcus's prescription bottles and items that had belonged to Jenny and the other victims from previous schools, Sarah's facade finally cracked. Arrest was surreal because even as they handcuffed her, Sarah kept trying to manipulate the situation. She looked directly at me with those calculating eyes and said, "I was trying to help you, Emma. Everything I did was to make you stronger, to help you grow. You'll understand someday." The absolute conviction in her voice, her genuine belief that she was somehow helping us by systematically murdering us, was more terrifying than anything else that had happened. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Sarah's crimes. Over 7 years, she'd killed at least 15 people across 4 different colleges, always targeting close-knit friend groups and always positioning herself as the caring, concerned friend who was just trying to help. She'd study her victims for months or sometimes years, learning their psychological profiles, building their trust, and then eliminating them one by one in ways that looked like accidents, suicides, or random crimes. The FBI found detailed files on dozens of other potential victims, people she'd been studying and evaluating for future targeting. David and Lisa both needed extensive therapy to recover from the realization that they'd been living with a serial killer who had planned their deaths down to the smallest detail. David blamed himself for telling Sarah about my suspicions, convinced that he'd almost gotten me killed. Lisa became obsessed with the idea that she could have saved Marcus and Jenny if she'd been more observant, if she'd recognized the signs earlier. The guilt was eating both of them alive. As for me, I've been in protective custody for the past 6 months while the investigation continues and Sarah awaits trial. The FBI believes there may be other accomplices or victims we haven't identified yet, and they're concerned about potential retaliation from anyone who might have been working with Sarah. I'd had to change my name, my appearance, my entire identity, because even from prison, Sarah has been trying to contact me through letters and intermediaries. She still believes she was helping me, that what she did was an act of love and friendship. The psychological impact of learning that someone I'd trusted completely, someone I'd loved like a sister, had been planning my death for years has been devastating in ways I'm still trying to understand. Every friendship, every relationship now feels potentially dangerous. I find myself analyzing people's motives, looking for signs of manipulation, wondering if the kindness they show me is genuine, or if they're studying my weaknesses. The paranoia Sarah accused me of having has become real, a necessary survival mechanism in a world where I now know that predators can hide behind the faces of people who claim to love you, but the worst part is the knowledge that Sarah is still out there in some way, that her influence continues even from behind bars. During her psychological evaluation, she told the prison psychiatrist that she'd taught me valuable lessons about trust and survival, that I should be grateful for the experience because it had made me stronger and more aware. Even facing life in prison for multiple murders, She still believed she was doing something positive, something necessary. The complete lack of remorse or understanding of what she'd done is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire nightmare. I wake up every night in cold sweats, dreaming about that leather journal, about Marcus's death, about Jenny's body in that basement, about the sound of Sarah's footsteps in the hallway as she planned my murder. I dream about the friends I never got to have because I was trapped in Sarah's web of manipulation for so long. I dream about the person I might have been if I'd never met her. If I'd been able to form healthy relationships and trust people the way normal people do. The trial is starting next month, and I'll have to face Sarah again to testify about what she did to our friend group and to me personally. My therapist says it will be an important step in my healing process, but I'm terrified of seeing her again, of having to look into those calculating eyes and remember how completely she fooled me for so many years. Part of me is afraid that she'll still be able to manipulate me somehow, that she finds some way to make me doubt my own experiences and memories the way she did when we were living together. But I know I have to testify, not just for Marcus and Jenny and all the other victims, but for David and Lisa, who are still struggling with their own trauma and guilt. I have to make sure that Sarah never gets the chance to hurt anyone else the way she hurt us. I have to make sure that other people understand how sophisticated and dangerous these psychological predators can be, how they can hide behind the mask of friendship and love while planning the destruction of everyone they claim to care about. Sometimes I wonder if there were others before us who saw through Sarah's facade but were silenced before they could warn anyone. I think about Amanda Rodriguez, my former roommate who tried to warn me but disappeared before she could explain what she'd found. I wonder if Amanda is still alive somewhere, if she managed to escape Sarah's web, or if she became another victim whose death was made to look like something else entirely. The thought that there might be other survivors out there, other people who escaped Sarah's plans, gives me hope that I'm not alone in this nightmare. The FBI agent assigned to my case, Agent Martinez, tells me that my survival and testimony will likely prevent Sarah from ever hurting anyone again. She says that victims like me, who manage to escape and expose predators like Sarah, are rare and valuable witnesses who can help protect others from similar fates. But the cost of that survival, the psychological damage, and the destroyed ability to trust feels overwhelming most days. I survived Sarah's plan to kill me, but I'm not sure I survived her friendship intact as I sit here in this safe house. Writing down everything that happened, I keep thinking about that first day at orientation, when Sarah smiled at me and invited me to be part of something special. I wonder how different my life would have been if I'd walked away from that smile, if I'd trusted my instincts instead of my loneliness. But then I remember that Sarah had been doing this for years before she met me, that there were other Emmas at other schools who fell for that same smile and paid for it with their lives. Maybe